They said come for Christmas. My daughter called on a Tuesday, which should have been my first sign. She never calls on Tuesdays. She calls when she needs something, a recipe, a favor, a check. But this time her voice was warm, almost honeyed, and she said, "Mom, we want you here this year. The kids are asking about you. It just doesn't feel like Christmas without you." I was standing at the kitchen sink when she said it, watching the last of the November light fade across the yard, and I felt something open up in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. Wanted. Not needed. Wanted. So I said yes. I said yes before I even thought about the drive, about the 3 hours on the interstate, about my knees that don't love long car rides anymore. I said yes the way you say yes when someone finally offers you the thing you've been quietly hoping for. And then I sat down at the table and I started making a list. I baked for 3 days straight. 2 loaves of cranberry walnut bread, a tin of ginger snaps, and 6 jars of peach preserves from the last of the summer peaches I put up in August. I wrapped everything carefully in cellophane and ribbon, the way I used to when the grandchildren were small and Christmas still smelled like something real. I packed the good dishes I promised my daughter years ago. The blue-rimmed set from my mother that she'd admired once at Easter and never stopped mentioning. I figured Christmas was as good a time as any to finally bring them. I packed 4 days' worth of clothes. I pressed my good blouse. I even had my hair done the Thursday before, something I only do for special occasions now, because at 68, I've learned that getting your hair done is an act of hope. My neighbor Ruth watched me load the car on the morning of the 23rd and said, "You look happy." I told her I was going to my daughter's for Christmas. She smiled and waved me off like I was heading somewhere wonderful. Maybe I was. I left at 7 in the morning. The roads were clear. The sky that pale winter blue that makes the South look like a watercolor. I had a thermos of coffee in the radio playing low, old Christmas songs I knew every word to. Somewhere around the 2-hour mark, I called ahead. No answer. I left a message. Said I was making good time. Should be there by 10:30. Said I was bringing peach preserves and couldn't wait to see everyone. I hung up and turned the radio back up and kept driving. I pulled onto their street at 20 minutes past 10. The house looked quiet. That was the first thing I noticed. No cars in the driveway except my son-in-law's truck, which he never moves. No lights on the porch, though I'd seen the photos they posted last week with the garland and the big wreath. The wreath was still there, at least. I sat in the driveway for a moment, thermos in my lap, waiting for the front door to open. It didn't. I got out and rang the doorbell. Waited. Knocked. Waited again. Tried the handle because sometimes they leave the door unlocked when they know company is coming. It was locked. I stepped back and looked at the windows. The curtains on the front room were drawn. I walked around to the side gate, the one that leads to the back porch, and pushed it open. The yard was empty. The patio furniture had the covers on it. I stood there with my thermos in the December cold working its way through my coat, and I thought maybe they went to pick something up. Forgot to mention it. Maybe the kids needed something last minute and they'd be back in 10 minutes. I went back to the car. I called my daughter's cell. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called my son-in-law. Same. I called my youngest grandchild's phone. He's 17 and surgically attached to his, and it rang and rang. I left a message for my daughter saying I was in the driveway and to please call me back when she got this. Then I waited. 40 minutes. I turned the car on twice to run the heat. I watched a neighbor across the street string lights on a cedar tree. I watched a dog trot down the sidewalk by itself, confident as a mare. I watched the wreath on my daughter's door just hang there, unmoving. At some point, I picked up my phone, not to call, just for something to do with my hands. I opened the photo app out of habit, and there it was. My daughter had posted 15 minutes ago. A restaurant I didn't recognize, all warm amber lighting and white tablecloths. My son-in-law at the head of the table, red-faced and grinning. My daughter beside him, hair done, earrings I'd never seen before. My grandchildren on either side, both smiling for the camera. A man and woman I didn't recognize, probably his brother and wife, with champagne glasses raised. The caption said, "Christmas came early this year, grateful for this crew." I put the phone face down on the passenger seat. I looked at the wreath. I looked at the locked door. I looked at the blue rim dishes in the back seat, wrapped in a dish towel, and the 6 jars of peach preserves I'd stayed up until 11 to seal properly. I thought about the Tuesday phone call, the honeyed voice. "It just doesn't feel like Christmas without you." I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. There was a moment where it might have gone that way, where the pressure behind my eyes built up and I thought, here it comes. But it didn't. What came instead was a kind of stillness, the way air goes quiet before a storm turns. I started the car. I backed out of the driveway slowly, the same way I pulled in, and I drove away from the wreath and the locked door and the empty driveway. I didn't have a plan. I drove down the main road until I saw a diner with a hand-painted sign that said Millie's and a parking lot with a few trucks and an older Buick that told me it was the kind of place that was open on December 23rd. I pulled in. I turned off the engine. I sat for a moment. Then I took my thermos and my purse and went inside. The place smelled like bacon grease and pine cleaner, the best combination I know. Christmas lights blinked slowly around the front window. A woman behind the counter had a Santa hat pushed back on her head and was refilling coffee without being asked, which I have always considered a sign of good character. She looked up when I came in and said, "Sit anywhere, hon." I sat at a booth by the window. The vinyl seat was patched with electrical tape, but it was warm. The menu was laminated and listed things like biscuits and gravy and the daily special, which was beef stew. I ordered the stew and a piece of the coconut cream pie I could see under the glass dome on the counter, and a cup of coffee to replace the tepid remains in my thermos. "You doing anything for the holiday?" the woman asked when she brought my coffee. "Change of plans," I said, which was the truest thing I'd said in a while. The stew was good. Real good. The kind made by someone who knows that low and slow's the only way. I ate the whole bowl without rushing, without checking my phone, without doing the mental calculation of whether I should call again or wait or drive back and knock harder. I was done calculating. I was done adjusting myself to fit into spaces that had already been decided without me. The pie was even better. I left a $20 bill on the table because the woman with the Santa hat deserved it, and I went out and sat in the car and thought about what to do next. I had 2 options. I could drive the 3 hours home and arrive after dark, alone, to a house I'd left with so much hope that morning it practically had its own weather system. Or I could find somewhere to sleep and drive home in daylight when things make more sense. I found a Hampton Inn about a mile down the road. Nothing fancy, but clean, and they had a little Christmas tree in the lobby with the ornaments all the same size, the way hotels do it. The young man at the desk was polite and didn't ask questions. Room 208, end of the hall. 2 double beds, a small desk, a window that looked out onto the parking lot, and, beyond it, a Walgreens with a lit sign. I set my purse down on the bed and sat beside it. I looked at my phone. 3 missed calls from my daughter. 2 texts. The first one said, "Mom, where are you? We went to Marcus's for brunch. Thought you knew it was a whole thing today." The second one said, "Did you even come? Your car wasn't here." I read them twice. I set the phone on the nightstand, face up this time, and I looked at the ceiling. Thought you knew. As if I had been told. As if I had misread an invitation that never existed. As if the version of events where I drove 3 hours and sat in an empty driveway for 40 minutes was somehow a misunderstanding on my part. I got up and went to the little desk and pulled out the notepad the hotel provides, the one nobody ever uses. I started writing. Not a letter to anyone. Just a list of things I could see clearly now. The brunch I hadn't been invited to. The Christmas dinner that seemed, based on that photo, to be happening at someone else's table. The Tuesday call that had felt like an invitation but apparently functioned more like decoration, something to hang on the season and take down in January. And then I started writing a different list, an older list. One I should have written years ago, the car repair I paid for when my son-in-law lost his job in 2019. The 3 months of their mortgage I covered quietly. No paperwork, no repayment schedule. Just a mother doing what mothers do. The braces for my oldest grandchild, because the insurance they had didn't cover enough. The down payment I contributed when they bought this house, the one with the locked door and the wreath. I wrote it all down on the hotel notepad in my slow handwriting, and when I got to the bottom of the page, I flipped it over and kept going. I slept better than I expected to. Woke up before 6, which I always do. Lay there in the dark listening to the parking lot sounds, a delivery truck, a car alarm someone silenced quickly, and I thought about my grandson, not the 17-year-old who hadn't answered his phone, the older one. My daughter's son from her first marriage, 24 now, living in Nashville, studying to be an electrician. He called me every other Sunday, not for anything, just to talk. He called to tell me about the job he was working on, about the apartment he was fixing up, about the girl he'd been seeing. He asked about my garden. He asked if I was sleeping okay. He sent me a voice memo last month. Just him singing along badly to a Waylon Jennings song in his truck because he said it reminded him of me and he thought I'd laugh. I did. I lay there in the hotel dark and thought about him and felt something warm move through the cold place in my chest. By 7, I was dressed and back at Millie's for breakfast. Eggs and toast. The same woman was there, Santa hat replaced by a regular ponytail. She recognized me and said, "Back again," like it was the most natural thing. I said yes. She poured my coffee before I asked. At 9, I drove home. The 3 hours felt different going back. Choir. The radio was off. I thought clearly, the way you can only think when you've stopped hoping for something. I thought about the Tuesday call and the version of my daughter that made it. The one who knew how to sound warm when she needed something or when the season required it, or when guilt tapped her on the shoulder and she wanted to quiet it with a gesture that cost her nothing. An invitation I would never see the inside of. I thought about all the gestures I had made that cost me something. The money, yes, but also the time. The holidays I drove to and sat at the end of the table and was handed a glass of wine and a topic to stay on. The Easters where my son-in-law talked over me. The birthdays where I sent cards that were never mentioned. The year I knitted a blanket for their new baby. 3 months of work, my hands aching by December, and saw it in the donation pile by February. I was not angry. I want to say that plainly. What I felt was more like waking up in a room you've been sleeping in for years and noticing for the first time that the windows are painted shut. When I got home, my house smelled like the cranberry bread I'd baked, the loaves I hadn't brought because there was no room in the car. I put my bag down and went to the kitchen and stood there for a moment. Then I put the kettle on, sat down at the table, and called my grandson in Nashville. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Grandma." His voice, low and easy, like it always is. I told him I was home. He said he thought I was going to my daughter's. I told him there'd been a change in plans. He went quiet for a second in that way he has, where he's thinking before he speaks, which I have always admired about him. "Are you okay?" "I am," I said. "And I meant it in the specific way you mean something after you've tested it. I actually am." We talked for a while. He told me about his Christmas, just him and 2 friends in Nashville, Chinese food and a bad movie, which sounded honest and fine. I told him about Millie's diner, the coconut cream pie. He laughed and said that sounded like exactly the right Christmas Eve. I agreed. Before we hung up, he said, "Can I come see you after New Year's? I've got a long weekend." I said yes. The way I should have been saying yes to things all along, without conditions, without wondering what it would cost me, without calculating. The next morning was Christmas. I woke up and made coffee and sat on the back porch in my coat with a blanket over my lap. The yard was still. A mockingbird moved through the empty pecan tree, branch to branch, unhurried. I thought about what I needed to do and in what order, and the thinking felt clean, purposeful, like water running the right direction. 2 days after Christmas, I drove to the bank. My account manager was a woman named Diane, who had helped me set up the automatic transfers years ago. She had a professional manner and a quality I've always appreciated. She didn't fill silences with noise. I told her I needed to review all recurring transfers and payments. She pulled them up on her screen. There were more than I expected. A monthly transfer to my daughter's household account started years ago as temporary help that had simply never stopped. A quarterly payment toward my son-in-law's truck, which I had agreed to co-finance in a moment of pressure I still remembered clearly. An automatic gift deposit to their family savings every January, which I had set up as a New Year's gesture and apparently forgotten to ever question. "I'd like to stop all of these," I said. Diane looked at the screen for a moment. "All of them?" "Everyone." She didn't ask why. She started typing. While she worked, I looked out the window at the parking lot. An elderly man was helping a woman about my age out of a car, one hand steady at her elbow, the other holding her coffee. They moved slowly, no hurry at all. "Done," Diane said. "Effective immediately. Do you want confirmation emails? Please." She hesitated before closing the window on her screen. "There's also a joint signature authorization on one of your CDs. Do you want to address that today as well? My son-in-law's name. Added during the same season of pressure, when I thought the gesture proved trust. When I thought trust was something you proved by giving access. Remove it," I said. She nodded. She printed the forms. I signed them steadily. Walking back to my car, I stopped once, just to stand in the December air and breathe. It was cold and direct, that particular winter clarity that doesn't apologize for itself. I stood in it for a moment longer than necessary. Then I got in the car and drove to my attorney's office. I had worked with him since my husband passed 8 years now. He stood when I came in, still the same man in the same chair, a little grayer, the bookshelves a little fuller. He knew from my voice on the phone that this wasn't a routine visit. We talked for 2 hours. By the time I left, my will had been redrawn. My estate, the house, the retirement accounts, the money I'd spent decades of careful living to set aside, now directed to my grandson. Not as a punishment, as a choice. The first clean, uncoerced choice I'd made about my own resources in longer than I wanted to admit. I asked my attorney to include a letter of intent, not legal language, just my own words explaining the decision. He said it could be attached to the filing. I said good. I'd write it at home, where I could take my time. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with the peach preserves I hadn't delivered, the 6 jars lined up in a row, still ribboned. I looked at them for a while. Then I took one jar and opened it and spread some on a piece of the cranberry walnut bread I'd baked, and I sat there eating it slowly in the quiet of my own kitchen. It was the best thing I'd tasted in weeks, maybe longer. New Year's came and went. I made soup and watched the ball drop on television without ceremony. I didn't make resolutions. I had already made decisions, and decisions last longer. The calls from my daughter started arriving with more urgency somewhere in the first week of January. The first few were vague and warm, the Tuesday voice again. "Just checking in. Haven't heard from you. Hope you're well." Then my son-in-law, which was notable because he almost never calls me directly. His message was short and careful, like he was reading from a script someone had handed him. "Trying to reach you. Give us a call when you can." Then my daughter again, the warmth gone now, replaced by something thinner and more honest. "Mom, we need to talk. There are some financial things that have come up, and I think there's been some confusion. Not confusion, clarity. Those are different things." I listened to the messages. I did not return them. Not out of cruelty. I want to be precise about that. I did not stay silent to punish them. I stayed silent because I was done spending my voice on conversations that moved in circles, where my concerns arrived and were immediately redirected, where I was the one who always adjusted, always softened, always found the angle that made everyone comfortable except me. The silence was mine now. I had earned it. My grandson arrived on the Friday of his long weekend. I heard his truck in the driveway before I saw it. That particular engine sound I'd learned without trying. He came to the door with a duffel bag over one shoulder and a grocery bag in each hand and said, "I brought stuff to make chili, if that's okay, and cornbread. I looked up your recipe." I stepped aside to let him in and felt something so ordinary and real move through me that I had to turn toward the kitchen so he wouldn't see my face. We made chili together. He knew how to work in a kitchen, which surprised me and shouldn't have. He chopped the onions without being asked, tasted the pot and suggested more cumin, washed things as we went without making a production of it. We talked while we cooked about Nashville and his work, about a roof he'd rewired and the homeowner who cried when the lights all came on, about the girl who was kind, he said, and not dramatic, which he said like it was the highest compliment he could think of. I told him about Christmas Eve, the diner, the pie, the hotel with the parking lot view. He set down his spoon and looked at me. She just didn't tell you the plan changed? She thought I knew, I said. He was quiet for a long moment. That's not okay, Grandma. No, I agreed. It's not. That was all. No drama, no lengthy dissection. He picked his spoon back up and stirred the chili and said, "Well, I'm glad you went to the diner." We ate at the kitchen table, the peach preserves open between us because he'd spotted them on the counter and asked, and the cornbread came out better than either of us expected. He ate 2 bowls and asked for a third, like a man who was not performing anything, just hungry and comfortable and at home. After dinner, we sat with our coffee and he said, "I want to ask you something and tell me if it's none of my business." Ask, "Are you doing okay?" For real? Not just the Christmas thing, in general. I thought about it the way the question deserved. "I'm doing better than I have in a while," I said, "because I'm being honest with myself about things I let go on too long." He nodded. "What kind of things?" "Financial things," I said. "And things that weren't financial but should have had a price tag on them anyway. My time, my energy, the assumption that I would always be available." He was quiet, looking at his cup. "I'm not angry at your mother," I said. "I need you to understand that, but I also can't keep funding a life where I'm left in a driveway." He looked up at that. I hadn't told him the driveway detail. He put it together quickly, and the thing that moved across his face wasn't pity. It was respect, which is what I needed. "I think you're doing the right thing," he said, "and I think you've been waiting a long time to do it." That night after he went to bed in the guest room, I sat in the living room in the dark with one lamp on. The house was quiet in the good way. I pulled out the notepad I'd been using for the letter of intent, the one I was writing slowly, the way it deserved. I read what I had so far. "To whoever reads this after I'm gone, I want to be plain. This is not bitterness writing. This is clarity. I spent the better part of 2 decades giving to people who received it as their due and offered back, at best, politeness. I am not asking to be thanked. I am asking to be finally honest about what happened. Love is not a debt, but it is a direction. Mine went only one way for too long." I picked up my pen. I added a few more lines. Not to explain myself to anyone. They wouldn't read them the way I meant them anyway, but because some things need to be said out loud, even if it's only to a page. He left Sunday afternoon, stood at the door with his duffel and said, "I'm coming back in March, and I want to fix that back porch screen while I'm here. Don't hire anyone." I told him I'd been looking at that screen for 2 years. "I know," he said. "I saw it last time. I should have offered sooner." He hugged me the way he always has, like he means it and isn't in a hurry. Then he drove away and I stood on the porch until the sound of his truck faded. Inside, the house held the smell of chili and cornbread still. I moved through the room slowly, washed the dishes, put the leftover chili in a container, wiped down the counter, set the clean pot back on the rack. In the drawer next to the refrigerator, behind the rubber bands and the spare batteries, was the notepad from the hotel room. The list I'd written on the night of December 23rd. The 4 pages of everything I had quietly given away. I took it out and read it through once, completely, start to finish. Then I folded it and put it in the fireproof box under the bed, not to look at again, just to acknowledge that it had existed, that the accounting was real, that I had not imagined any of it. My daughter called on a Tuesday again. Of course she did. I almost smiled at the symmetry. I let it ring. Then I made a cup of tea and sat down and listened to the voicemail. Her voice was different this time. Not honeyed, not warm, not performing. She sounded tired, the way people sound when they've run out of the energy to manage impressions. "Mom, I know you're upset. I know I messed up. I don't know what's going on with the accounts, and Marcus is. She paused there. I just want to talk to you. Please, just call me. I sat with it for a while. Then I called her back. She picked up on the first ring. Mom. I'm here, I said. There was a long pause, and I could hear her working up to something. I didn't help her get there. I had spent too many years smoothing the way. I'm sorry about Christmas, she finally said. It was Marcus's family, and it was a whole thing, and I should have explained it better. I didn't think. She stopped. I didn't think. That's the truth. You didn't think, I said. That's a fair way to put it. I didn't mean to leave you sitting there, but you did. A silence. Not comfortable, not filled, just real. The accounts, I said. I've made some changes. You'll notice them if you haven't already. I noticed. Her voice was careful now. That's not punishment, I said. I need you to hear me say that. It's not meant to hurt you. It's me drawing a line I should have drawn years ago between what I give because I love you and what I give because I'm afraid you'll have less of something if I stop. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. I've been taking advantage of you. Yes, I said. You have. And I let you. That part is on me. Another long quiet. What do we do now? She asked. That's up to you, I said. I'm not leaving. I'm your mother and I will always be your mother. But I'm not available to be forgotten and then remembered when it's convenient. That's the change. She said she understood. I don't know yet if she does. Understanding is something that proves itself over time, not over one phone call. But the call was honest in a way our calls haven't been in years, and that was enough for now. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table. One of the peach preserve jars was still on the counter, half empty from the weekend. I looked at it for a moment. Then I got up and went to the back porch and stood in the January cold. The yard was still, the pecan tree bare, the sky going pink at the edges as the light changed. My neighbor Ruth was walking her dog down the alley and she waved and I waved back. I had driven 3 hours on December 23rd expecting to be welcomed into a house full of family and Christmas and the feeling that I mattered to someone in the way that costs something to give. I had sat in a cold driveway with jars of peach preserves and my mother's blue-rimmed dishes in the back seat, and I had found, instead, that no one had thought to leave a light on. I had eaten coconut cream pie alone in a diner with a woman in a Santa hat, and I had slept in a Hampton Inn and watched the parking lot Walgreens sign blink in the dark. And I had come home. And I had been honest, and I had let my grandson make cornbread in my kitchen, and I had picked up the phone and said what needed saying, and I had not apologized for any of it. The cold pressed in at my collar, that familiar sharp edge that doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. I breathed in. I breathed out. I went back inside, put the kettle on, and started writing the last few lines of that letter. Not the legal one. The real one. The one that said what I wanted to be the last true thing anyone read from me. I chose with intention. I gave where it was received. And I finally, late but not too late, chose myself. That is not a small thing. That is everything. I put the pen down. Outside, the evening light was doing that ding it does in January, going quickly and without ceremony, leaving behind a dark that is clean and complete. I turned on the lamp above the table. The kitchen glowed the way it does when it's just you and the heat and the small, quiet sounds of a house that knows who lives there. I sat in mine. If you're reading this, if you've ever stood at a door that stayed closed or waited for a call that turned into a caption on someone else's holiday, hear me say this. You don't have to keep adjusting yourself to fit into a frame they drew without you in mind. You are allowed to drive away. You are allowed to eat the pie by yourself and find it's the best thing you've tasted in years. You are allowed to come home and change the things that needed changing and sit at your own table and decide with clear eyes what you owe and to whom. And if this story found you somewhere you recognize, share it. Someone out there is still sitting in a driveway waiting for a door to open. Tell them to drive away.